Hi, and welcome to this week's small group. To start out our small group, I want you to think about an influential or important person in your life. Tell the small group about that person. And if you could ask them to impart one thing to you before they died, what would it be? What's great about this question, it's going to make you analyze, why is it that they're so important to me? Now I want you to read 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 19 through 21, and ask these questions. What did it mean when Elijah threw his cloak over Elisha? What was the significance of that? And what did Elisha sacrifice, and what did he leave behind in order to follow God's calling on his life? Few things that I want you to notice about this story is that Elijah was saying that Elisha would be the next great prophet over Israel. By putting his cloak over Elisha, he was saying, you're next. I'm going to train you. You are going to be the next one. And Elisha sacrificed his job, his plans, and he left behind his family in order to follow after this calling that God had on his life. I mean, he gave up everything. In fact, if you notice, he slaughtered the animals that he was working with, and he gave them as a sacrifice to God. And then he chopped up the plow, and he burned the plow. So for Elisha, there was no going back. I want you to think about your own life. What have you had to sacrifice or leave behind in order to follow Jesus? And was the sacrifice worth it? Next, I want you to read 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. So we see where Elijah kind of brings Elisha on board, but now we're actually going to see when Elijah finally passes the torch to Elisha. And as you read these, I want you to ask these questions. Why do you think Elijah kept telling Elisha to just stay here? And why did Elisha insist on going with him? What was going on there? And why do you think that Elisha told two sets of prophets not to speak of Elijah's departure? What I want you to notice here is that Elijah was testing Elisha's devotion. He was giving Elisha, hey, listen, you can go. If you don't want to be here, if you don't want this responsibility, you can go. But Elisha kept saying, no, I want to be with you. I want to be with you. And he was devoted to Elijah. He loved Elijah. I also want you to notice that Elisha was not emotionally ready for Elijah to leave. How does it feel when someone you depended on is gone? You know, all of us in our lives, we've had somebody that we've lost. Maybe it was a parent or a grandparent or a friend or a mentor. What did it feel like when they left? Why do we tend to fear change? Now I want you to read 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 7 through 12. Why was it significant that Elijah parted the waters? What's so significant about parting waters in Scripture? And what might it have meant to receive a double portion of Elijah's spirit? One of the things that I want you to notice is that parting the waters was done by Moses and his replacement Joshua. Remember, Moses parted the Red Sea to get out of Egypt, but then Joshua parted the Jordan as they were going into Israel to take the Promised Land. All right, and so it was parting the waters signified God's presence. See, it proved to everybody that God was with Moses as Moses was leading them away from Egypt. And then after Moses died, it proved that God was with Joshua as he was leading them into the Promised Land. What I want you to notice about asking for a double portion A double portion was the inheritance given to the oldest son. So for a long time, I thought that what Elisha was asking for is, well, I want double the amount of spirit that you have. But what he was actually saying is, I want you to consider me like your son, and I want the inheritance. I'm ready for this. So what is meant by the statement, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel? I want you to go back to that scripture, read it again. What exactly does that mean? And why did Elisha rip his own clothes after Elijah was taken? What I want you to notice is that the chariots and the horsemen were considered the protectors of Israel. Right? If there was a threat to Israel, they would call up the chariots and the horsemen because they were the ones to protect. But what Elisha realized in that moment is that it was Elijah, the prophet, who truly protected Israel through the power of God. And tearing one's clothes was a sign of intense mourning. And so while on the one side, Elisha was saying, yeah, I'm ready for the responsibility, he was broken over the fact that his mentor was gone. I want you to read 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 13 through 15. What was the significance of Elisha putting on Elijah's cloak? And where did Elisha receive the power to part the Jordan River? Putting on the cloak of Elijah meant taking on the responsibility of his ministry. Going back to the beginning, when Elijah threw his cloak over Elisha, he was saying, one day you're going to wear this cloak. One day you're going to take on this responsibility. And so that was really exciting. But the moment, I want you to imagine the moment that he reaches down and the only thing left of Elijah is his cloak. And now he has a choice. Do I really want the responsibility of being the prophet over Israel? And when he put on that cloak, he was putting on that responsibility. Elisha's confession shows us that the source of his power is in God's presence. Right? And so Elijah goes up to the river, and yes, does he do the same thing with the cloak that Elijah did? Yes. But the power is not in the cloak. The power is not in some inheritance that Elijah gave to him. The power is in God, whose presence is now with him. And parting the waters for Elisha meant that God's presence was now with him. Remember that Moses parted the waters, and then the guy who replaced him, Joshua, parted the waters to show, man, God is with me just as much as he was with Moses. And now we see in this scripture that Elijah parted the waters, and then Elisha parted the waters in front of the same crowd so that they would know that God's presence had shifted from Elijah to Elisha. I want you to close out the small group with this. Name one person in your life that you would be lost without. Talk to the group, have everybody talk about that one person that just means so much to you in your life. Now, according to this lesson, what should our response be when we lose someone significant in our lives? Yeah, it may be a time of mourning, but what else is God trying to teach us through this lesson? Man, have a great discussion. Have a great time of prayer, and we'll see you on Sunday.